That night, Aris decided to head home later than usual. His job as a consultant often required him to travel out of town. The roads were eerily quiet, illuminated only by the dim and flickering streetlights scattered along the way. Fatigue was setting in, and he knew he needed to rest before continuing his drive on the long, dark road ahead. After a few more miles, he noticed a weathered sign that read, Karangjati Station. It was an old station, isolated amidst thick trees and overgrown shrubs. The place seemed abandoned, but the faint glow of a light near the platform drew his attention. Aris decided to stop there, thinking it was a safe spot to stretch and clear his mind before resuming his journey. He parked his car in front of the station and stepped out into the cool night air. The building was dilapidated, with peeling paint, moss-covered walls, and cracked windows. Despite its condition, the platform lights were still on, though they flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows across the station's crumbling walls. As Aris walked onto the platform, his footsteps echoed unnaturally, sounding louder than they should. He found a worn wooden bench and sat down, trying to shake off the unease creeping into his chest. The night air felt unusually cold. Not the typical chill of the evening, but a biting, almost hostile coldness that made his skin prickle. Out of nowhere, an old man appeared from the shadows. His face was pale and weathered, his eyes sunken but strangely alert. He was dressed in a faded station attendant's uniform, complete with a cap that had seen better days. "Good evening, sir. The last train has already passed," the man said in a flat, low voice. Startled, Aris forced a polite smile. He hadn't expected anyone to be there. "Oh, I'm not waiting for a train, just taking a quick rest," he replied. The old man nodded once and walked away slowly without another word. As the man disappeared into the shadows, the silence around Aris grew heavier. Suddenly, he heard faint footsteps at the far end of the platform. He turned his head quickly, but saw nothing. A moment later, the sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by what sounded like a rolling suitcase being dragged across the ground. It stopped abruptly, leaving Aris feeling more uneasy than before. Then he saw it, a shadow moving across the window of the station's waiting room. The shadow was unmistakably human. Driven by curiosity and an odd sense of foreboding, he decided to investigate. The waiting room was dark and smelled damp, with a musty staleness that made him gag slightly. The walls were covered in illegible scribbles, and the air felt colder than it had outside. In the corner of the room stood an old wooden chair, creaking ever so slightly as though someone had just risen from it. Out of nowhere, the door behind him slammed shut with a deafening thud. Aris jumped, his heart racing. He hurried back to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge, as if it had been locked from the outside. Just as he started to panic, he heard whispers. They were soft at first, like a gentle breeze, but grew louder, overlapping into an incomprehensible cacophony. It sounded as though dozens of voices were murmuring at once, each coming from a different direction. He spun around, searching for the source of the whispers. Then he saw it, his reflection in the cracked window pane. Standing behind him in the reflection was the old man from earlier. But something was different now. His face was twisted and bloody, his eyes vacant, void of life. Aris screamed and closed his eyes, his chest heaving with terror. When he opened them again, the reflection was gone. The door creaked open behind him. Without hesitation, he ran back to the platform, only to find the old man waiting for him there. "You need to leave," the man said, his voice low but firm. Aris nodded and began to back away. But before he could move further, a low rumble echoed through the station. He turned to see a train pulling in. It wasn't just any train, it was ancient, with faded paint and dim, flickering lights. The sound of screeching metal filled the air as it came to a halt. Inside, Aris saw passengers dressed in colonial-era clothing. They sat eerily still, their faces pale and lifeless, staring blankly out the windows. The train doors creaked open, revealing a woman in a white gown standing at the entrance. Her face was ghostly pale, her eyes hollow, yet her gaze was fixed on Aris. Slowly, she raised her hand, beckoning him to board. Fear consumed him as he stumbled backward, turned, and ran to his car. He fumbled with his keys, but the engine roared to life, and he sped away from the station without daring to look back. When he reached home, Aris couldn't shake the images from his mind. The train, the passengers, the old man, all of it replayed in his thoughts, haunting him. Desperate for answers, he searched online for information about Karangjati Station the next day. What he found chilled him to his core. The station had been abandoned for over 20 years following a catastrophic train accident that killed dozens of people, including the station's attendant. The descriptions of the attendant matched the man he had encountered that night. Since that night, Aris has never driven near that area again. Yet he still hears faint train whistles and feels the icy cold presence whenever he's alone in the dark. In his dreams, he sees the woman in white, her hand still beckoning him to join the silent passengers on that cursed train.